When you become a manager and a leader, you literally have to stop doing all of those things that made you successful as an individual contributor. It is not about having, the answers. It is actually about asking questions. It is not about going fast. It is about going far. It is not about running a sprint. It's about creating a sustained pace for a marathon. And I failed at all of those, Gareth. I think the first time I did it, I just did not even think about it. And then I got a ton of feedback.
Yamini Rangan got on a flight from her native India to the United States armed with nothing more than a couple of academic qualifications, a little bit of experience, and a whole lot of belief in herself. Fast forward to the present, Yamini is now the CCO of global CRM provider and inbound marketing pioneer, HubSpot. Her career is nothing short of inspirational. We talk about this, we get her advice on how brands can get noticed in this world of noise, and much, much more. You'll love this one. It's Yamini Rangan. Yamini, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Gareth, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've been really excited about this one, actually. I know you're all the way over in California. Look, let's. Lots of people know HubSpot, of course. It's a globally recognized brand. It's a massive deal these days. Probably the inventors of the inbound marketing world, possibly, or certainly one of the biggest educators in that space. But they may not know who you are. So if you could just give us a little intro to yourself, what you're doing, and a little bit on your background as well, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I'm a big fan. So thanks a lot and appreciate it. And yeah, a little bit about me. My name is Yamini and I'm the Chief Customer Officer at HubSpot. And a lot of times people are like, what does that mean? It really is simple. It means bringing together a lot of the customer-facing functions like marketing, sales, customer success, support, so that we can deliver delightful customer experiences. It's simply that. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that as we go on. But a little bit about my background. I'm an engineer by trade and a salesperson by heart. And that's a very unlikely combination. And if you told my mom 20 years ago, I'd be a sales kind of person, she'd be like, what? So I grew up in South India, very small town, and started as an engineer. I did electrical engineering back in India. And this was kind of early 90s. And then I did that. I came here to the US, one-way ticket, to come and get a better education. So I continued my education in engineering with a computer engineering degree and practiced engineering, writing code and developing software for about 5 years. And Gareth, I realized that as much as I love technology, I like talking about technology and explaining technology and making people understand what technology could do than actually talking to machines. And so I switched to business side, went to Berkeley, and I've now spent the last 20 years in go-to-market. The first 10 was B2B, go-to-market, sales, product marketing in on-premise companies, Siebel and SAP in particular. And the last 10 years, I have spent in B2B cloud, completely kind of taking my skills to the cloud. And it's been just an incredible journey of learning with companies and leaders that have really helped me think about scaling in a very different way. So that's how I got to HubSpot.
So you covered an extremely varied and an amazing career in a very succinct way there. So let's maybe unpack some of that, because that I can't let that amazing story go uninterrogated. So you basically grew up in southern India then, and talk us about why the initial phase of your life when you first got into engineering and you knew that was sort of a direction that you wanted to go into, like technology. Where does this passion for technology come from then?
Yeah, I'll tell you that, I grew up in a fairly small town, and my mom was a big part of my inspiration. She was a perfectionist. She demanded perfection out of myself. And, it's probably, a typical kind of Indian upbringing of wanting to get like a really good education. Her primary focus was that we're two daughters. I have an elder sister, and her primary focus was to provide us an education that can make us economically independent. And this was growing up in the 80s, right? And so it was way back. And her primary focus was that. And she was like, she would have been thrilled if I'd been a doctor. But I was like, no, I kind of want to, go into engineering. And I showed up in engineering in the early 90s. And I'll tell you, Gareth, that time in our engineering school, we probably had about 300 graduates in one class, and we had about 10 women. And so a lot of my early questioning, and motivation actually came from that experience, because I don't think it was as okay for women to be in hardcore engineering as it was okay for women to be in medicine or law or some other, professional degrees. And part of, that early experience was really, it led to one thing, which is take yourself seriously to be taken seriously. And what I mean by that is when I joined engineering school, there was a lot of question of like, hey, what are you actually doing here? Or do you really think you're going to use this education? And how are you going to, make this count? And just a lot of those kinds of questions, which was, okay to ask at that time and age. And part of my upbringing was I needed to be really good at whatever I did. And so those questions that I got early in my engineering path led me to take myself seriously. I was fairly playful before, and I got to a point where, no, if I am to be taken seriously, if I do believe that I have a role to play, as a professional, if I have a role to play in technology, then I got to take myself seriously. So it was one of those turning points in my early life that led me to have a lot of faith in myself that and take myself a little bit seriously in terms of what I wanted to accomplish.
But I read about you booking a one-way flight to Atlanta, and which is a pretty audacious move from a girl from 21-year-old from southern India. I'm sure your family were probably like, what the hell is she doing? Talk us through that phase in your life and that decision, and what was the first couple of months like in the US?
Yeah, I would say that my parents had encouraged that for many years. And in fact, a lot of the dinner table conversations, even before I got to that point, was, what are you going to do with your life? What do you want to do? And what's your biggest dream? And there was just a lot of, think big, and if you wanted to be a mountain climber, you could be the best mountain climber. If you wanted to be a great doctor, you could be a great doctor. You could be a great lawyer. So there was just a lot of encouragement and support very early on in my life. And it didn't feel as unnatural as it sounds right now. It sounds kind of like, a crazy move for someone to take a one-way ticket and come here to a new country that you didn't know anybody in. But at that time, it seemed somewhat natural. A lot of people from India were actually coming to the US for higher education. And it seemed somewhat of a natural move for me to, come here and get an advanced degree in computer engineering. But I will tell you, it was a shock. Growing up in Southern India, fairly protected, fairly middle-class life, and you come and land in Atlanta. And I went to school in Clemson, which is in South Carolina. And everything shifted, like everything around me shifted. First of all, was just getting adapted to a completely new country by yourself, right? And you didn't have any support system. You obviously had your fellow students that were kind of on the journey with you, but it was a completely new culture. It was a culture of questioning. I mean, in India, you're taught to, really be reverent, with your teachers, professors, and not ask questions. And here, class participation and asking questions was like 50% of everything that you did. So I had to shift myself. And then, the other part of it was the social side. I grew up watching cricket. You would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And you come here to the US, and I lived literally in an apartment that was right outside the football stadium at Clemson, which is, the Tigers. And my God, that was a whole culture. And so part of it was figuring out, a new educational philosophy, a very different culture. And again, figuring out, what you want it to be. You really needed to be focused. You couldn't get distracted. And I think that was also a period of time that I spent thinking, what do I want to stand to be in my life?
Yeah, that resonates with me because I did something quite similar at that around about that age as well. I jumped on a plane on a one-way ticket and I went to Canada and lived there for a year. So I read that you were working in an American football stadium or something. Is that true? You don't get much more American than that, do you? So you really jumped in the deep end.
Exactly. I was like, I'm going to throw myself at this deep end. And, I had, research assistantship in college, which put me through half of my expenses. And then I was like, well, I can go back to my parents and ask for more money, which, I don't want to do. I just said, I'm not going to do that. So what's the other way? And, sure enough, it was easy to find it was one of those basic jobs supporting the Tigers. And it was working in the stadium, serving food and beverages and also getting immersed in the culture. And I learned football that way. It was like, what's happening here? Why is everybody cheering? And again, it was, looking back, it just sounds adventurous, but I think it was just exciting. It was exciting because I had complete independence. It was exciting because I was on my own 2 feet and I'd been raised that way, right? Women need to get an education, need to be economically independent. So this was like me coming of age and really finding my own ground and exploring what I could accomplish in life. And so it was super exciting.
You left India all them years ago. You obviously, I'm assuming you go back from time to time. All the big tech companies seem to have offices and things there. What's the biggest sort of change you're seeing in India these days? What are you excited about?
Oh my God, Garrett. I think it's completely different. I do go back. I go back every couple of years, take my kids now back with me. And it's completely different. Again, thinking of the time that I went to engineering school, this was like back in the 90s. There weren't that many women there. I think what has fundamentally changed is the role that women can play, not just in degrees like engineering, but in science, in so many other professional careers that they're part of. I think the role of Indian women has changed pretty dramatically. And I also think that back in those days when I was growing up, it was one of those things where you did have to go to Canada or you did have to go to like US or you had to go some other place to get an advanced degree. And right now, that is not the case. I think the education system has grown pretty significantly. Technology is a hotbed in India, not just one city, in like 10, 20 different cities. And so I think all of the developments that we have seen in India just opens up opportunities for everybody. To stay in the country, remain the country, but also be on the cutting edge of technology. So I think it's pretty fascinating for me to go back and my kids. I tell them stories of how I grew up, and then they travel to India with me, and they're like, "Mom, I don't know what you were talking about because I can't recognize your stories and what I see here in this country right now." And so I have to draw the bridge between how India was when I was growing up versus where it is right now in terms of just the societal changes and also technology changes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's some really exciting stuff coming out of India for sure. So let's take this back to yourself then, Yamini, okay? You were over in the States, you wanted a career in technology. It was obviously in engineering is where you started. Talk us through that sort of big break and those first sort of 10 years of your career in the US.
I'd say that engineering is just one of those foundational things. I'm so glad I actually started my career as an engineer because it gives you some real life foundations.
It's not a traditional background for a marketeer, though, is it? It's for someone.
No, not at all. Not at all. But I do think, structured problem solving, being able to assess, what are the bigger parts of the problem that you need to solve, breaking it down, finding answers, finding patterns, and being somewhat methodical and leveraging, data and analytics to be able to answer. I think a lot of that actually comes from my engineering background. But as I was saying, my early years was actually as a practitioner, building code and developing software. And there came a point where I really enjoy talking about the technology and being able to communicate the value. And this is kind of what brought me to business school degree. And I went to Berkeley, which was actually just a wonderful experience, just meeting very different people from very different parts of lives and learning from that. But I'll tell you what was very interesting. Right after business school, I wanted to be in marketing. I wanted to be in product marketing because I thought, well, I can parlay my technology background and really focus on communicating what technology does, and how technology adds business value. So I was really interested in product marketing. And I got a job at Siebel, which is the original CRM company.
I remember Siebel well.
Great.
Yeah. They were a pretty big deal back then, eh?
Absolutely. And I was thrilled. The first day I joined, I actually found that I was in a sales organization and things had shifted pretty significantly. And they're like, hey, I think you're going to be better in this role. And it was like a value selling role. And it was a role all about communicating the financial value of technology, building, business cases and business models, being able to talk to decision makers. And that was great. I would not have chosen that for myself. Sometimes luck and chance plays a part. I would not have traditionally gone into customer facing, sales type of a role, but I found myself there and it was just incredible. I think what I learned is decision-making patterns, how customers get to decisions, what problems are they trying to solve, how do they look at a decision of buying a certain software, and where do they get value and who makes the decisions and how do you influence the right decision makers so that the customers can be successful? It really made me understand the value of interacting with customers, understanding their pain points and being able to solve those pain points, which still today is the foundation of how I approach my job. So that was just absolutely great experience.
Was there an element of customer service in that role as well then? Were you kind of dealing with problems and getting shouted at by angry customers, so to speak? Was there any of that there? So you could try and sort of solve complex customer problems? Was that generally what you were doing?
It was more a sales role, Gareth, than a customer service or a customer success role. It was really, it was called value selling. And back then the industry was making a transition from, talking about features, product bells and whistles to talking about value of what you got from technology. And the role was to be able to, understand, be part of a sales organization, carry a quota, support a number of, sales team members as an overlay sales rep, and be able to communicate the value. That was the role. It did involve solving complex problems because most of the time I would get involved at the time where a particular sales cycle needed clear justification from the board, clear justification for a CEO or a COO to make that decision. And so it was complex problem solving. Although I will tell you, I don't think I got yelled at in that role. I've been certainly yelled at in other roles, not that one.
The reason I brought that up is just because a lot of what you're saying resonates with me. I had a similar experience working in a mobile telecoms operator, and I worked in the retention department, which is essentially upselling existing customers to go back into contract, and you try and bribe them with handsets. You did back then. But we'd often have to deal with quite vociferous customers wanting the world on a stick, so to speak, in order to extend their contract. But I learned so much from that experience. It was great. So, but it is very similar to sales, isn't it? So you obviously Siebel, you learned a lot from. Talk us through you working for a global behemoth company like SAP, then one of the biggest software companies in the world. You must have had a big learning curve there, surely.
Absolutely. And it was a very similar role in the very beginning. It was all about being part of the sales organization and really trying to grow. And what SAP taught, and some of the leaders there are just phenomenal customer-facing executives. And part of the learning there was, how do you understand customer feedback? How do you make sure that you have a fantastic relationship with customers? And then how do you leverage that to be able to think about strategy? One of the pivots that I made at SAP was going from, this value selling organization to being part of strategy and operations. And that was a much needed kind of, shift, because for a number of years I'd been customer facing, spending, Monday through Friday in front of customers. And then I got an opportunity at that time to work for the current, CEO of ServiceNow, Bill McDermott. He was actually transitioning into a global role, running sales at that time. And he was a visionary. He wanted to have a game plan, a plan for the next 5 years of growth for SAP. And I had the opportunity to, work with him and support the process of understanding where SAP needed to grow and how SAP needed to kind of like expand. And that was, again, just phenomenal learning experience.
Yeah.
How do you translate demand patterns into driving a strategic plan for an organization? I think it was just incredible to learn from leaders like Bill.
So when he left SAP, then he went on to Salesforce then, is that right?
ServiceNow.
ServiceNow, excuse me.
Yes.
He's known for being quite innovative, isn't he, on culturing, of fostering a culture of innovation within ServiceNow and within that, because they were very disruptive, weren't they?
Absolutely.
So did you take that onto your, like, for example, your role with Dropbox? Let's talk about your role there. What did you sort of learn from that experience?
Yeah, and I think every one of these, I say this to people, that every time you're in an organization, you're learning something completely different. For me, from there, the transition to Workday and Dropbox, well, both of those organizations are, completely in the cloud and very different, from the on-premise world that I had come from. At Workday, it was all about hyperscale. I joined the organization when we had about 900 people within the organization, maybe 100 salespeople, and went through a phase of 4.5 years or so where every year we were doubling the size of the sales organization. So how do you think about hyper growth? How do you ensure that you have the foundation in place so that you can scale from a go-to-market perspective? What are the things that you have to look just around the corner so that you don't hit potholes, you don't hit unforced errors? And I think that is kind of what I learned. But I'll tell you what, both of those, I would say Siebel, SAP, Workday, they were all enterprise B2B. And one of the things that I have for myself is to challenge and do something completely different, completely new. So I could have easily gone from Workday to another very large company or an enterprise, play. But I spoke to Dropbox, and what was interesting is a completely different, segment, customer, and model for going after from a growth perspective, which is a product-led growth organization. This is an organization that kind of was one of the first freemium models, very quickly amassed hundreds of millions of free customers, and they were really innovating, in terms of providing a collaborative solution for the SMB space. So I knew nothing about SMB, I knew nothing about product-led growth, and I knew nothing about, how to help an organization kind of like grow. And of course, I didn't say that to them then, but, I
wasn't part of your interview pitch then, no?
That was not my interview pitch. My interview pitch was, I kind of understand how the business operations needs to function and how to scale an organization on the sales side. But it was very exciting. It was challenging. It helped me solidify my approach to go to market, which is a very, very data-driven approach of bringing all of the customer-facing functions together across marketing, sales, and customer experience to be able to deliver something of value to our customers. And I think that data-driven approach, a lot of times in sales, you got to figure out, what is your unique approach to sales? What is your unique approach to go to market? And seeing enterprise playbook as well as an SMB playbook made me realize that I really like and want to innovate in a data-driven playbook for go to market.
Thank you for tuning in. I just want to take this opportunity to thank some of our friends. Firstly, all-round tech PR superstars Nelson Bostock. Whether you're an established technology brand or a fast-growing fintech, you need the right team behind you, a team that understands your brand, your purpose, your goals, and can really help you define your narrative and tell your story, the story that matters. These guys tick all of those boxes and more. You can find them at nelsonbostock.com. That's Nelson Bostock, the CK on the end, .com. Highly recommended. I also want to thank Tramshed Tech. We've come down here and they've kindly allowed us to use their world-class recording studio facility down here. But they do office space, they do events. I can't recommend them enough. That's Tramshed Tech. And also a big shout out to Be Digital, who make all this possible. Be Digital enable organizations to become lean, agile, and to attract the right talent. That's bedigitaluk.com.
Just before we go on to HubSpot then, I wanted to ask you about what would you consider the most important milestones were in your career?
Yeah, I think one of the first one is what we just spoke about, Gareth, which is finding myself in the sales organization. It was completely by chance. I don't think I would have done it, and I found myself there. But I think what was even more important is finding my authenticity within the sales organization. So, think about, 2000, circa 2003, 2004. And I joined, a couple of sales organizations where it was all about relationship. It was, a lot of people that didn't quite look like me within the sales organization. And a lot of the early questions was like, how am I going to add value? I don't have relationships in Silicon Valley. I don't have a Rolodex that I can depend on in the Valley. And how do I bring a unique perspective to this? And one of the first things is I tried to fit in. I tried to go and learn golf. I hated it. I tried to watch Monday Night Football. I hated it. And I was like, I had a lot of these struggles of how do I make myself be part of, the sales culture within a tech organization? And I actually, after a couple of missteps, I realized, no, I actually bring something completely unique. I bring a very engineering and data-driven and analytical mindset to sales where I can add tremendous value to my customers by being able to explain things, but also approaching it in a very logical manner. I was able to gain a lot more credibility because I didn't depend on relationships. I depended on logic and data and analysis to be able to get a sale. And that changed. That was a huge milestone. And going through that process and trying to find my own authentic voice within a sales organization made me realize I can do this. I can do this. I can do it in a way that is uniquely me. And that is a huge learning. A lot of times, women, especially in sales, will say, would you have taken this role now knowing everything that you know? And absolutely. I tell women all the time that, you can be whatever you want to be and think about your authentic space that you can create. And so I think that was a big, milestone, that process. And I'd say the other big one was actually being in strategy and operations and being able to really get the big picture and begin to lead teams. There is a moment in your career when you're kind of going from being a fantastic individual contributor to a manager and a leader. And I think, we all assume that we want it in our, earlier stages in our career. We're pushing for it. When do I become a manager? When do I get a team? And the first time it happened, I kind of didn't even think about it. I was used to being a sprinter, going super fast and getting the answers and working double hard, than everybody else. And then when you become a manager and a leader, you literally have to stop doing all of those things that made you successful as an individual contributor. It is not about having, the answers. It is actually about asking questions. It is not about going fast. It is about going far. It is not about running a sprint. It's about creating a sustained pace for a marathon. And I failed at all of those, Gareth. I think the first time I did it, I just did not even think about it. And then I got a ton of feedback. And part of the feedback was that, hey, I think you are going super fast and you don't give the opportunity for people to come and join that pace. And that was absolutely the right feedback. And part of it was questioning myself to say, do I still want to do this? Or I could go back to sales and be an individual contributor. Do I want to keep going on this path of leading teams? And I had to come to grips with the feedback, and I had to come to grips with the changes that I needed to make in my operating system to be a leader. And once I did have a lot of mentors, I banged on at their doors to give me the answers, and I got a lot more questions. And I think once I figured out to get answers, then it was a completely different path. And I think I found a very different gear to operate in as I continue to grow in my career.
Wow, there's some amazing things you said there. The one that you said about not about having answers, it's about asking questions. I think that sums up leadership. I actually felt like the Brian Halligan, then the CEO of HubSpot, interviewing you for the role in January of last year. So talk us, I can see why he hired you. Your passion certainly comes through talking about this stuff. Talk us through that decision to join at HubSpot. And just a bolt-on question to that is, what is the purpose of your role and what are you there to achieve?
The conversation with Brian was fantastic. It was a year and a half ago. I would say that I was not actually, talking to folks and recruiters or taking calls, but Brian reached out and he said, I want to learn. You are a chief customer officer. We're actually creating this new role within our organization. We want to bring all these teams. So what is your role? Can you talk to me about your role? And that was, the initial conversation. That's how we connected. And I have to tell you, Gareth, it was like the most fascinating conversation because it was nothing about, HubSpot, but everything about the lessons that he had learned and the lessons that I'd learned working at different tech companies over the years. What works, what doesn't work, and why do you think, creating this flywheel and bringing all of the customer organizations work, and what did you learn, and where would you drive a product-driven growth versus where would you drive a rep-driven growth? And it was one of those easy conversations. And I looked at my watch and it was like 90 minutes later, we were still talking. And he said, hey, would you consider, HubSpot? And at that time, and I live in California. This is an East Coast company. This was pre-COVID where distance and geography mattered. And I was like, I don't think I want to be part of a company that's based in Boston. I want to be with my team and walk and talk to them every single day. But I will tell you, when I visited Boston and I visited the team and I had further conversations, it just became so clear that HubSpot is built with this, solving for the customer in the DNA of the company. It's there in the walls, it's there certainly in the posters, but more importantly, it's there in the decision-making and the DNA of the company. And for someone that has a role called Chief Customer Officer, there's the word customer in the title, there is nothing better than actually working in an organization that deeply cares about customer experience. And I think what HubSpot and Brian particularly was trying to do was to bring marketing, sales, customer success, all of these organizations together so that we can deliver great experiences, we can make decisions faster, we can make decisions that really help our customers scale. And that was his vision. And for me, it was like, probably the best thing I could have done is to join an organization that cares so deeply about customer and then be able to create, an aligned strategy that can take us forward.
Let me ask you this question then, Yamini. What is the difference between sales and marketing? Or is there a difference?
That's a great fundamental question. I would say marketing's role is really to attract the right kinds of customers. And the way HubSpot has approached it, you said it at the beginning, we kind of invented inbound. And the reason we invented inbound was because before that, marketing was just, interruption. You had a nice dinner and someone would call and bug, you to take a call about something. You were online and you were actually looking to do something, and some random advertisement popped at you and made you click through something. And so before that, interruption was the way people marketed. And HubSpot had a very basic premise that you need to add value before you can actually get value. And the way to add value is delivering great content, something that you care about as a buyer, something that you get value from. And if we did provide that value, great. And if you want to continue to engage, that's great. So I think the fundamental role of marketing is to attract the right, prospects and customers into the organization. And then the role that sales plays is to engage, those customers that have now chosen to be part of, engaging with your organization. You engage them and you provide them the right value. So that kind of what I want to do. So, we have a saying inside, especially last year, that helping is really the new selling. And if marketing really focuses on providing value before extracting value, then helping is the new selling. Do you have a problem? What is your pain point? How have you tried to solve this before? Why has that worked? Why has that not worked? And therefore, can we help you solve that problem? And I think that is what is fundamentally different about marketing and selling these days.
Absolutely. When I first did the HubSpot certification training years ago, not long after HubSpot released it. And it completely changed my view on it altogether. I thought I was a salesperson. I was actually a marketeer. It kind of I had a paradigm shift in terms of the way I thought about it. And so it was a really sort of powerful moment when I made that realization, because it changed the way I worked. But so what are you excited about right now that HubSpot are working on? Is there anything coming up or anything notable? Any projects you're working on right now? What does the next sort of 6 months look like for HubSpot?
Absolutely. Last year, 2020, the world changed. We didn't quite know this, but the world changed. The world changed in some fundamental ways. Things that would take a very long time, in order to shift human behavior, shifted pretty dramatically. A lot of our customers who entered last year thinking, oh yeah, we need to be digital ready. They ended the year 10 months later saying, we need to be digital first. We need to be digital only, right? I think that was a huge paradigm shift that happened last year. And sometimes you think about technology advancements and how long it takes. Well, we saw change in 9 months that didn't happen in the previous 9 years. And I think it's, we leaped forward in terms of being digital first and digital only. That actually gets to an even more important part of what 2021 is about, which is the customer experience needs to be completely digital. The entire customer experience. And so you can't just buy a certain way and not be able to service a certain way, and the entire customer experience matters. So the focus at HubSpot, this year is to be the number one CRM for scaling companies. That is really the focus. And the way we are doing this is to, one, help our customers align marketing, sales, customer success all together, and then provide the right tools with the right information so that they can scale. And so I'm super excited. All of the things that we're doing this year across the organization from a product perspective, as well as a go-to-market perspective, clearly lines up to us being the number one CRM for scaling companies.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I think you can probably pull that off for sure. Look, I think that sounds really, really exciting. I'm just mindful we're coming towards the end of the time now. So I just wanted to get some advice from you, basically, Yamini. We've got a lot of business owners listening and a lot of sort of leaders and things like that who manage teams, sales teams, marketing teams, et cetera, et cetera. What one piece of advice would you give to a small business right now in the B2B world who are looking to get themselves noticed?
Most of the times, businesses need to focus on two things. The first one is the people that you have in the right roles. Do you have the right people in the right roles, for you to be able to tackle the next year, the next 3 years? This is the constant job, whether you're a small business or you are a medium-sized company or a very large company. You should constantly be assessing the talent and making sure that you are putting the right people in the right roles, the right jobs. I think the second part of it, this year in particular, you should be thinking not incrementally, but you should be thinking about leapfrogging. The market dynamics have changed pretty significantly. And you can't just say, well, let me add just this one more person. Let me just kind of like fix one small thing. I think this is the time for every business to be thinking about massive leapfrogging. So have a 3-year plan and really figure out the major leaps that you need to make as a business to be able to get there.
Fantastic advice. And what person, book, or story have you been inspired by in the last 12 months? You've had a lot of time on your hands in the last 12 months. Everybody's been working from home. Anything, any little anecdotes or books you've read which have given you some inspiration?
Honestly, I'd say that it's not one, but a whole bunch of books that I've been reading, over the last year. I think a couple of books that I really enjoyed. Ray Dalio wrote a book on principles. Really is one of those fundamental works which basically breaks down, what are the first principles that you need to do to, drive, a business, to make changes. And I think that book was hugely inspirational. One of the books that I come back to every year, and I certainly went back to this multiple times, Gareth, was $1 Trillion Coach. It is the story of Bill Campbell, who was a coach in his first part of his career and then ended up in Silicon Valley running companies, and then famously coached Steve Jobs and a number of Google executives as they grew in the 90s and 2000s. And so the book is called $1 Trillion Coach, and it's written from the perspective of these executives that got, the coaching from Bill Campbell. And what is inspiring about Bill's life is that, he took the principles of coaching from a sports perspective and applied it to technology, and was able to, break down the science of a one-to-one meeting, break down the science of a team meeting, break down the science of inspiring teams, break down the science of how to get teams motivated to get to kind of the next level. And I really take a lot. I go back to the book multiple times, and I certainly read it every year. And I think he's one of those, he's unfortunately not alive right now, but I think I've learned so much from watching what he did in his career. Super inspirational.
And let me just finish on this one then, Yamini. I know you're very passionate about girls getting into STEM subjects and just getting into technology in general. I've got 2 daughters myself. How are you seeing? What's your perspective on that right now? I know there seems to be more girls getting into this space. Is it something that's improving? And what have you done to sort of to sort of try and help this and aid this cause over the course of your career, being someone so influential?
Oh, that's awesome that you have 2 girls. That's great. I think the question of have we improved? Well, certainly, I think, since the time I got into engineering school, when, the overall gender diversity did not even exist within the college, to where we are right now, I think it has improved. Can we just rest on that improvement? No, absolutely not. There is just so much that we need to do to get gender diversity in science programs and math programs and engineering programs, gender diversity in companies and in C-level positions, in board positions. So I don't think that we are anywhere close to feeling like we have accomplished something. I think the pace is okay, but there's just a lot more work to be done. I think it comes down to exposing girls from a very young age about the possibilities that they have. There's just a lot of general perceptions, opinions, and bias that women are better in certain things versus not. And I think you have to do everything possible to go and break down those barriers. One of the things that, I really am passionate about is education for women. Both back in India, I'm part of a number of organizations that very specifically have programs to educate women. One, project I've been working on is a Project Potential. This is an organization that takes a 1-year methodical approach to get women the right kinds of experiences and exposures so that they can then become part of IT companies and provide a feeder to IT companies. I mean, I'm really passionate about that. So I give my time, I certainly give my resources, to programs that are all about educating women. I think at work, I try and make myself available to mentor as many women as possible, and as many people of color as possible, so that they can see the different paths available for them. I think it's much more about showing the way and saying that encouraging people to go on paths that they didn't think existed, and really, really passionate about that. If you ever want me to talk to your girls, I'm game.
I will hold you to that, Yamini, for sure, because it's all about confidence, isn't it? And I think speaking to people like yourself who have been very successful in your field, I think it adds a lot of value to people's confidence levels, and it just makes them feel like anything is achievable, doesn't it? That's right. So, but look, I know you've got to go, so I really appreciate your time, Yamini. I've loved this conversation. It's one of my favorites. Thank you so much. Good luck in your role, because you've only been there just over a year, haven't you? Is it your year anniversary coming up, isn't it? And
I just finished it. Yes.
Oh, lovely. Okay, so but good luck with everything. Thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast. It's been a privilege.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having, and it was just a delightful conversation. Thanks a lot, Gareth.
If you enjoyed and took value from the show, then don't forget to subscribe, and also feel free to leave a review. We would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening.